Hello and welcome to a special edition of Choppers Politics. Now, ever since Jeremy Corbyn became leader of the Labour Party back in 2015, I've been begging, cajoling and pleading with his team to grant me an interview with the Labour leader. I've been dying to put the questions at the Telegraph that I might have, but each time they said no, not enough time. And yet this week, days before he stands down as leader on Saturday, his team got in touch and said yes, he'll do the interview. So here we are in my front room, about to call up Jeremy Corbyn, Labour leader for just one day more, for his first and last interview with the Telegraph. This is what happened. So Jeremy Corbyn, let's start with the basics. How are you?
Absolutely fine. Absolutely fine. I'm keeping in good health, taking my daily exercise with the appropriate time ordained by the government, and making sure I get fresh air and good food, but also obviously concerned about people in my own community who are going through terrible levels of stress at the present time.
Well, we'll come on to that, and absolutely. But of course, you're 70 years old. Are you shielding, or are you walking out and about?
I'm keeping appropriate distance from people, but yes, I am cycling or walking around, but keeping an appropriate distance, and I try to keep myself as fit as I possibly can. I don't smoke, I don't drink, I'm a vegetarian, I eat fresh food, I grow my own vegetables. What else is there necessary in life for good health?
And you mentioned your vegetables. Our readers at the Telegraph and listeners to this podcast love the idea of your allotment. How is it going? Is it growing well?
It's fine. I haven't been there for the past 10 days or so because life has been incredibly busy dealing with CV, but it's in good order, ready to be planted out. It's been quite a cold spring, so I've delayed planting potatoes and other things, but it's all ready and fine, and it's been well manured, and the broad beans are growing fine, the garlic's growing fine, the onions are growing fine, and the fruit trees were all appropriately pruned by me in December and January, so they're in good order as well.
So you're on your marmalade duty later on this autumn?
Well, we don't do marmalade, we do jam. We do blackberry and apple jam and damson jam and fig jam.
Good. Well, that's great. It's good to talk about a non-coronavirus topic for at least 2 minutes, but we have to get back to that, I suppose. How do you feel about the Tory government using socialism to bail out capitalism?
Well, they've suddenly realised that 10 years of austerity have created a massively unequal and divided society, and that people who do important jobs like cleaning absolutely matter and are essential to our world. They also have recognised that the underfunding of the health service has been a disaster, and that we got into coronavirus crisis with 94% bed occupancy, obviously very little spare capacity to deal with the crisis that's upon us. And so they've had to pour money in to the NHS, and I'm pleased they have at last done that. I'm also pleased that they've taken the principal view that they will support businesses and jobs to keep them going. There are many, many holes in the programme, particularly where self-employed workers are concerned. And I really wonder sometimes if the modern Tory party understands the nature of the economy in which we live, in that a very large number of people have insecure lives as self-employed, a very large number of people have insecure housing through the private rented sector, and that there are huge insecurities within our society. And they've suddenly realised that these are actually a threat to the health of all of us. And so, if nothing else, at least there's been a realisation that it is possible to invest in public services and people, and you actually get a good reward for it. Although the levels of stress and poverty surrounding coronavirus are already there to be seen. If you go and look at a supermarket now, okay, there's a queue to get in, and they're 2 meters apart and so on, which is right. You see people with a big credit card balance trying to buy up everything. You see others that are scrimping just to get by, and that's what it's about.
The policies the government's been doing in the past 2 weeks have nationalised the railways. There's talk of a national broadband service, billions to the NHS, support for universal credit, although not reform, money into business. Do you think this will change Britain?
I think it already has changed Britain, and it doesn't seem very long ago that I was being condemned for wanting to bring the railways into public ownership, to bring in free universal broadband, and to reform universal credit by bringing back social security. I was condemned for all of that in the television debates by the very Prime Minister who is now saying it's very important to have the railways into public ownership. Well, I welcome the repentance of a sinner.
Do you think he's had a good crisis, Boris Johnson? I mean, we're speaking on the day then, moments ago, the death toll rose by a shocking 569 people to 2,961, nearly 3,000 deaths.
At a personal level, I wish Boris Johnson well, and I hope he recovers. I don't think the government or he are completely aware of the enormity of the issue they're facing. I don't think they've got across the World Health Organization advice on testing properly. So we're still only at 10,000 tests per day, or not even quite at that level. And there is no way of knowing the extent of coronavirus until everybody is tested. And so I think we should take a leaf out of South Korea and Germany, which are testing. And as you said, the death rate has shot up again, and it's going to be some time before there is any levelling off, when the social isolation begins to have the desired effect, and it is some way off, and it's obviously very difficult for people to understand that, because they're making enormous sacrifices.
Why do you think the government had a tin ear to watching the example of South Korea and Germany? Is it Brexit? Are they shut to the example of the European Union and how they've done it differently?
Well, I think they have an approach that was also about the herd immunity idea for a while, which was that you allow a level of infection in society, and that builds with it a degree of immunity, and that builds a sort of strengthening within the society, which is actually an appalling idea. And they finally got round to the idea of testing as a way of dealing with it, but also recognising that the vulnerable people are those that have got underlying health conditions, those living the worst lives and the poorest, who tend to be the most vulnerable to coronavirus.
Did you know someone who's died of this?
Sadly, yes. It's awful. It tends to be older people that have died as a result of this, and I think we just have to have an awful lot of sympathy for what families are going through at the moment. In fact, I was talking to somebody just now who had lost a parent, not from CV, but nobody can go to the funeral. And that is devastating. If you lose a parent and you can't go to the funeral, you feel forever guilty as a child. And so it's at a human level, this is huge. And I think we often underestimate the levels of trauma that people are going through. And when I see people in my own community, I live in my constituency, who are stuck in quite small flats all the time with quite large families sometimes, the stress levels are absolutely huge, and I worry about the levels of domestic violence that might come out of this somewhere down the line. We need to recognise there is a social aspect to this as well. We're asking a lot of people to give up their income, to stay home in order to stop the spread of the virus. We've got to give them all the support we can in getting through this. It's not everybody has a semi-detached house with a large garden and they can spend their time looking after their garden and making it nice, which is a lovely thing to do. There are many just don't have those options.
Exactly, and well said. To what extent do you think Labour should agree to take part in a national government to help deliver this national effort to get past this?
I think it's important that democracy is strengthened during this, and therefore the last day of Parliament before the recess I was making the whole point that there has to be accountability of ministers to Parliament, and the Speaker has responded with ideas about the way in which there can be electronic scrutiny of government and demands made. I appointed a team within the shadow cabinet to coordinate our response to coronavirus, which was is John Ashworth, is John McDonnell, is Shami Chakrabarti, is a number of other colleagues dealing with housing, Luke Pollard dealing with food supply, and so on.
But should you get into government and do it there?
I think we should be challenging the government, challenging them on the economic response, challenging them on job security, and that is the way to get better government and better decisions. If everybody got together and said we're all absolutely in this together, we won't criticise each other, that is a negation of what a democratic society is about. It doesn't mean we don't recognise it's a very serious crisis. It means the opposite. It means we recognise it's a very serious crisis, and it's the duty of opposition parties to hold the government to account, and that is exactly what we're doing. I'm calling meetings twice a day, usually, of our coronavirus group, and the Shadow Cabinet has met many times on Zoom call, as has the Parliamentary Labour Party, and we've been picking up some terrible stories about the way in which some employers are treating people at the present time. And that is what democracy is about, taking up those stories and confronting government with them.
In terms of the fallout from this crisis, do you think income tax will have to rise by quite a lot in the autumn to pay for it all? And if so, to how high?
Well, clearly there is a huge cost to this, because the government is obviously having to pay for large swathes of the economy at the present time. And take the railway system, for example. It's not going to recover all the passengers on day one after coronavirus is over. It'll take quite a while to do that. Some of those companies that have lost opportunities and lost markets may not survive all of this. Many small businesses may not survive. And so there's going to be a need for strong investment in the economy. That will mean debt and deficit will increase, as it has after every crisis. But if we adopted the same approach that was taken in 2010 after the financial crisis, which was to cut public spending and cut investment, then that would be utterly the wrong approach. The approach to get through it and to rejuvenate the economy has to be investment in it. And I hope that is the big message that's come through coronavirus, that the public investment and public participation are absolutely crucial to the economic well-being of all of us.
But paid for how? Through higher taxes?
Paid for through a combination of borrowing, and, well, tax rises may come in the corporate sector, may come. But let's look now at getting through this crisis, and look also at the need to invest for the future. And if that can be done through borrowing, through government bonds as a way of rejuvenating the economy, that is the right thing to do. So you get more economic activity, and obviously you get more tax income as a result of that. But it's fundamentally a Keynesian argument. You invest for the future.
Looking back on your time as leader, Jeremy Corbyn, what lesson would you take away from it? What would you have done differently?
I've spent a lot of time trying to balance competing forces within the Labour Party, competing forces between a large proportion of the Parliamentary Labour Party, and competing pressures from a lot of Labour Party and trade union members around the country. And that has been a fascinating and interesting experience. But what I'm pleased of is that we've become a party that is about economic investment, that is about ending austerity, that is about the green industrial revolution, that is about a society that's based on eliminating poverty and the worst levels of inequality, and globally that we promote environmental and human rights sustainability around the world.
But what's your biggest regret, though? We know your record.
There's some huge pluses there. Biggest regret is the election result in 2019. Obviously, I put everything I could into that campaign. At the end of the day, the differences over Brexit were big within our society, and Boris Johnson was offering something very simplistic, which he has not yet delivered. But then I don't think we need to get involved discussing Brexit now. The most important thing is to get through coronavirus.
To what extent were you to blame for that defeat? 50%, 75%, 100%?
I accept responsibility as leader of the party that I led the party into the election campaign on a unanimous decision as to the contents of the manifesto by what's famously known as our Clause 5 meeting, which is representatives of all sections of the Labour movement. And I threw everything I could into that campaign. And we had a huge turnout of people working in that campaign, as we did in 2017. We also had an unprecedented level of hostility from a lot of media in 2019, rather more than 2017. And that probably made a difference. But I accept responsibility. I led the party. And whilst I don't regret any of the policies we put forward, I'm very proud of the policies we put forward. I do think that it was Brexit that caused the problem, and I do think that the relevance of everything we said about redistribution of power and wealth in society is as appropriate now as it was then, and will be seen to be even more appropriate as coronavirus plays out.
I wonder if you might regret going against your natural Eurosceptic instincts and doing that deal with the Remain side, when in fact you know the value of Brexit and how it can help this country.
Well, I wanted to ensure that the party came together. And for example, I represent a constituency that has 40% of the children living in poverty, and it voted heavily Remain. Ian Lavery has a constituency where probably the same number of children are living in poverty, which voted heavily to leave. Their interests are actually the same in a government that's going to work for them.
You didn't mention anti-Semitism there. Some of your critics would say that was a big low light of your leadership.
I've spent my life opposing racism in any form whatsoever. And in 2016, I was very proud to speak at the commemoration of Cable Street, alongside some people that had been there at that time, opposing the rise of fascism, because what they were trying to do to the Jewish community of East London. Anti-Semitism is a uniquely vile form of racism in any form whatsoever. When I became leader of the party, there wasn't any proper process in place for dealing with allegations of anti-Semitism. I asked Shami Chakrabarti to do a report on it, which she did, and to set up a process which took far too long to be set up. And we do have a robust process within the Labour Party of dealing with allegations of anti-Semitism, and people are suspended or expelled if they are absolutely guilty of anti-Semitic behaviour. I believe that we have done the right thing on that. We've also set up an education process. As a society, we cannot be defined by racism. We cannot be divided by racism. And I would have thought this crisis has shown the importance of communities respecting each other.
Looking forward, Jeremy Corbyn, do you want a front bench role under the new leader, whoever that person is on Saturday?
Let them decide that. I'm happy to work for the party in any way. My focus will be, as always, campaigning on justice and human rights issues and being the MP for Islington North. But above all, ensuring that as a party we remain committed to economic justice, we're committed to redistribution of power and wealth and the values, the socialist values that go with all of that.
How many times did you rebel when you were a backbencher?
Oh, it depends how you define rebellion, but I voted against a number of issues in Parliament, such as the believed the wrongness of the Prevention of Terrorism Act.
But it was hundreds of times. Will that carry on when you become a backbencher?
Listen, it depends what the votes are and what the issues are, but I always believe in being true to oneself.
Do you regret nominating John Bercow for a peerage?
I can't discuss peerages.
Well, you're reported to have nominated him.
Well, then you must read the reports.
Okay, fair enough. Did you think the next leader should do more to appeal to Middle England? Because I was reflecting, this is the first interview you've done with the Telegraph since you became leader, and you're quitting on Saturday. Don't you think talking to the right-wing press may allow you to test your views and be challenged on them more?
I've spent a lot of time fielding questions from extremely right-wing journalists. I'm
not one of those.
No, I didn't say you were. I said that there are such people around. Listen, if you're middle-aged, middle class, you might think you're going to be okay. And then you discover you've got to pay for your kids' uni debts. Then you've got to pay for the social care of your elderly parents. And then you find you've got to remortgage your house in order to get your family through a particular problem in their life. Suddenly, all values about a coherent, cohesive society dominated by the needs of the welfare of all of us, suddenly becomes centre stage. And I think we can appeal to people on that basis of community solidarity, and that is what I've tried to do.
But how can Labour track back to the centre ground?
Some might say that we are obviously now very much the centre ground. The centre ground is the party that wants to invest in the community. The centre ground is the party that respects the cleaner, respects the street sweeper, respects the refuse collector, respects the firefighter, the nurse, the hospital cleaner, all those crucial jobs that we need, those that look after those who work in social care. That's the centre ground. The extreme are those that tolerate these levels of injustice, poverty and inequality in the fifth richest country in the world.
I know you're an optimist, but do you think the fallout from this crisis might actually hasten in a Labour government in 2024? Because the fallout could well be looking back on the lack of investment in the NHS and other areas, austerity and how that left the NHS unprepared for the pandemic.
I think people have woken up to the inadequacy of our public services and the need to invest in them, and the way in which we have allowed local government as well as health and care services to be so diminished. And we've developed a benefit system that is so cruel and tolerated what is probably 25,000 people sleeping rough in our society. I was looking forward to winning an election, and my first announcement was going to be the end of rough sleeping homelessness in Britain straight away.
That was one of your first 100 days announcement.
That was going to be in the first 3 days.
Oh, goodness. And what a frustration, those ideas won't get anywhere, but you'll be trying to pitch in to the next leader. You'll be a supportive leader, won't you?
Ideas live on forever, and activists live on forever. I will be doing my bit to encourage others to be active and to stand up for all the causes that I believe so passionately in. But I want to say thank you to all those in the Labour Party and the communities all over the country that have been personally very kind and very supportive to me. And after the general election, we received probably more than 10,000 emails and letters and cards from people all over the country who gave me a description of their own lives and their own experience and their own campaigning ideas. There's an awful lot of people who believe very strongly in a different, decent and better society. And you know what? This very moment, they're busy supporting each other in the communities all over this country to get through this crisis. That's the kind of movement we are.
But the party has to move to the middle ground, doesn't it, to win in 2024?
We are the middle ground. We're the ones who want social justice.
What's your message to Telegraph readers? Why should they vote Labour, Jeremy Corbyn?
Vote Labour if you want to live in a society which does care for all, which does give a young person wherever they live a chance of a decent education, decent apprenticeship, decent degree. And if you want to have those people who've got disabilities properly supported, those people that need social care properly supported, then you can't do it by leaving it to the free market. You have to do it as a community.
And if you were summarising your time as leader in one of your tweets that go viral, what would you say?
We can do better as a society than we've done, and we will.
And your political epitaph, the first line of your epitaph.
There is no epitaph yet. I'm still around. I'll let you know when I'll let you know when the time comes.
Jeremy Corbyn, thank you for talking to the podcast from this lonely office in Parliament, and all the best for the future. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Bye now.
Jeremy Corbyn there, in one of his final interviews as Labour Party leader. Now, what struck me there was when he said that the Labour Party doesn't need to move anywhere to attract more middle ground voters. We are the centre ground, as he said. And also, he may have bound the next leader's hands there by saying that Labour shouldn't enter a national government. That, of course, is where some people think the Labour Party should move to. And, of course, he could also return to his past as a serial rebel on the backbenches, unless he gets a job on the front bench. Well, we'll know soon enough. But above all, thank you so much to Jeremy Corbyn for taking the time to talk to Choppers Politics. Thanks also to my producers, Elliot Lampitt, Louisa Wells and Theo Luludis. But most importantly of all, thank you to you for taking the time to listen. If you enjoyed it, please do us a huge favour, leave us a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps other people find us when they're looking for some podcast company when stuck in these long days of isolation. And don't forget, you can stay up to date with all the best Telegraph's content, coverage and news and analysis, including the work of our brilliant and unparalleled global health security team for free for 30 days by going to telegraph.co.uk/chopper. Until next time, cheerio!